Hello everyone, this is Ola, and this is the very last part of the skeletal muscle physiology, and here we will discuss the skeletal muscles motor control. So for our skeletal muscles to move, we need a contribution between different pieces. The primary motor cortex, in the cerebral cortex, the basal nuclei, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the spinal cord. However, at the highest level is the primary motor cortex. Remember that the precentral gyrus in the frontal lobe has the primary motor area, and here our skeletal muscles are represented. They are represented upside down. So up, there is the lower limb, and here there is the facial muscles. This representation is not proportional to the size. So here the fingers has all of this area, which is about the same like the trunk and hip. Of course, the size of the fingers is way smaller than the size of the trunk and hip. However, with our fingers, we are able to do precise and fine movements. So the signal begins from the upper motor neurons found here in the precentral gyrus. From there, the signal goes to the pyramidal system. Of course, before initiating the signal from the precentral gyrus, you have to make a decision about the movement, and this decision comes from the premotor area which is in the anterior part of the frontal lobe. This sends the order here in the precentral gyrus, and then from there the signal goes down to the pyramidal system. The axons of the upper motor neurons cross over in the medulla, so they go to the opposite side of the spinal cord, and so they supply the muscles in the opposite side of the body. So suppose you wanna move a certain part of your body. So the signal begins from the upper motor neurons found here in the precentral gyrus, then goes down with the pyramidal system to the lower motor neurons in the anterior horn of the spinal cord. From the lower motor neurons in the spinal cord, the signals go with the spinal nerves to move your skeletal muscles. So we call that the pyramidal system because the fibers cross over in the medulla. That's why we call it pyramidal system, and that's why the right precentral gyrus controls the left side of the body, and the left precentral gyrus controls the right side of the body. In addition to the pyramidal system, where the fibers cross over, we have the extrapyramidal system that begins in the brain stem. The pyramidal system, where the signal initiated at the precentral gyrus is very specific, meaning that if there is a stroke that happens in a certain area here in the precentral gyrus, suppose at the lower limb area, this means that a paralysis happens only on the opposite side lower limb. So here there is a localization when strokes happen. However, the the extrapyramidal system that comes from the brain stem does not cross over. So the signal goes here to the same side of the spinal cord and to the skeletal muscles on the same side. Here, the extrapyramidal system is not specific like the pyramidal system. Actually, the primary rule here is to maintain our muscle tone, our balance, and our posture. And also, this is responsible for reflexes. So if there is a damage here in the extrapyramidal system, there is no paralysis affecting a group of muscles. There is rather a problem all over the muscles of the body. Like kind of uh, problems in the body posture, in the muscle tone, and so on. Then comes the basal nuclei. They are found deeper in the brain, and they are made with gray matter, so cell bodies. Those are the caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus, substantia nigra, and the subthalamic nucleus. The basal nuclei function is to initiate and to terminate movements, meaning that a copy from the precentral gyrus, a copy of the movement, goes here to the basal nuclei. Then the basal nuclei take that, analyze it, and fix any errors and send this precise, analyzed, and fixed movement back to the precentral gyrus. And then this corrected one is the one that goes down to the spinal cord and to your skeletal muscles. Also, the basal nuclei inhibit any unwanted movements. Like as we are resting, we don't have tremors normally because the basal nuclei prevent any unnecessary movements. That's why when they are damaged in Parkinson's disease, resting tremors happen. So during rest, the person will have tremors. So the fingers will move like you are counting money, for example. Also, there are sometimes involuntary movements of the feet. So we call that resting tremors because they happen during rest, because the basal nuclei are now damaged and they are not able to prevent those unwanted movement. The second symptom of Parkinsonism is slow movement, bradykinesia. And this is a real problem to patients with Parkinsonism. Also, the muscles are rigid, so the muscle tone is exaggerated, and there is a hunched posture. If you look at the face on these people with Parkinsonism, you will find that it's kind of mask face, expressionless. So here is Muhammad Ali Clay before having the Parkinsonism, and you can see the smile and you can see the facial expressions here of happiness. Here, after having the disease, you cannot tell because they're actually kind of mask face, expressionless, and this is also a problem associated with Parkinson's disease. The voice is very monotonous as well. Then comes the cerebellum. The cerebellum is what maintains our balance as we move, meaning that the basal nucleus initiates movement. Then the cerebellum takes over. As you move, it corrects any errors. The cerebellum receives sensory information from three inputs. The muscle, which we call the proprioception pathway, so your skeletal muscles send a signal to the cerebellum, telling the cerebellum about their position. Also, the eye as well send a signal about the position, as well as the vestibular apparatus in the inner ear. Then the cerebral cortex, the precentral gyrus, also sends a signal to the cerebellum about the movement. So we have a copy from the precentral gyrus and we have inputs from the sensory organs. Then the cerebellum will compare the intended movement from the precentral gyrus with the actual ones and then correct any error and coordinate. The cerebellum, if damaged, what will happen is intention tremors. So during rest, you're okay. Once you start to move, there are tremors, because again, the basal nuclei is the one that prevents unnecessary movement, and it's okay. So during rest, you will not have tremors. As you start to move, now the tremors, shaking will happen, ataxia will happen. So there is a test to see if there is a cerebellum damage, which is the finger to nose test. So if you ask the patient to touch his nose with his finger, the patient will not be able to. As he moves the finger begins to shake. So this is a cerebellar damage, intention, tremors. Also, the heel knee test can be done. If you ask the patient to touch his knee with the heel, also shaking will begin to happen. There is might be a problem in the sensory inputs coming to the cerebellum. So again, the cerebellum receives inputs from three sources: muscles, which is the proprioception pathway, eye, vision, and ear, vestibular apparatus. However, the cerebellum is able to receive inputs from only two sources to be able to do its job. So suppose somebody is coming to the clinic and you are suspecting that there might be a problem in the inputs going to the cerebellum. You do a test that we call Ramberg test. So here you ask the person to close eyes. Now you are canceling the vision, and now you have the muscle and ear are intact or should be intact. So if you ask the person to close eyes and walk, he should be able to maintain balance. How about if the person closes eyes and sways as he walks? Then there must be a problem either in the muscle proprioception pathway or in the vestibular apparatus pathway. How to tell the origin of the problem, if it is in the vestibular apparatus or in the proprioception pathway? You have your patient lie down and then try to dorsiflex the big toe or move a limb, and ask the person if he feels the movement of the limb and if he's able to detect the position of the big toe, for example. If he's able to, this means the proprioception is okay, then the problem must be in the vestibular apparatus. If he's able to tell the position, then the proprioception is okay again, and the problem is in the vestibular apparatus. If he's not able to, this means the problem is here in the in the muscle pathway, which we call proprioceptive pathway. So the Romberg test, if positive, there are two possibilities: the vestibular apparatus is damaged or the proprioceptive pathway is damaged. If you move a toe or a finger for that person and he's able to tell the position, then the proprioceptive pathway is okay. Then the issue is in the vestibular apparatus. If he is not able to tell the position of a limb or of his big toe, then the proprioceptive pathway is damaged. And this is the reason for the positive Romberg test. Now, let's summarize the voluntary motor control. So at the top, we have the precentral gyrus, which is the primary motor cortex. Here, the signals begin from the precentral gyrus, from the cerebral cortex, from the upper motor neuron. A copy of that goes to the basal nucleus. The basal nucleus takes this and fine-tune that copy of movement. The fine-tuned copy goes back to the precentral gyrus, and then it goes to the pyramidal system, to the spinal cord where the lower motor neurons are, and to move your skeletal muscles. Now, as you move, the cerebellum takes over to maintain your balance and coordinate your movement as you move. To do that, the cerebellum receives sensory information from three sources: the proprioception, your muscles, the vestibular apparatus in the ear, and from the eyes. Also, the cerebellum receives a copy of the planned movement from the cerebral cortex. Now, the cerebellum will compare the actual movement with the planned movement and try to match them and correct any errors. So it gets that corrected back to the cerebral cortex. Then it goes down with the pyramidal system down to the moving muscles to fix any errors. Okay, now what happens if the precentral gyrus has a stroke? So we call that upper motor neuron lesions, and the resulting of that is a spastic paralysis, meaning paralysis happens and the muscle tone is increased, so rigid muscles. Also, the reflexes will be exaggerated. If you do the knee reflex, the patellar reflex, it's going to be exaggerated. In the spinal cord, if the lower motor neurons in the anterior horn of the spinal cord are the damaged ones, the result would be flaccid paralysis, absence of reflexes, very low muscle tone. How about basal nucleus damage? Resting tremors happens. How about cerebellar problems? This is intention tremors. Let's go with some review questions. The motor neurons that take motor impulses from the brain to the spinal cord are the upper motor neurons. If someone has a positive Romberg test and is unable to determine the position of the limbs, what is the issue here? So he is not able to detect the position, meaning the proprioceptive apparatus is damaged. What is the specific area of the brain responsible for initiating and terminating movement? It's the basal nucleus. The area of the brain that degenerates with Parkinson's disease, also basal nucleus. Resting tremors indicates basal nucleus damage. Intention tremors, on the other hand, is due to a motor cerebellar damage. A positive finger to nose test, meaning intention tremors, so also it's a motor cerebellar damage.